Hi guys, and welcome back again on weltsound. Many of you have requested a how to sound like UMEK tutorial. So UMEK is obviously one of the greatest producers out there in the techno world. And I rebuilt his track Cryptic Speech. We're gonna have a look at how his unique kick drums are made. We're gonna have a look at the main synth and how the call and response elements work in this track. And as always guys, you can get the whole Ableton session, all the presets, all the samples I've used and made for this project for free. Just follow the link in the description and get everything. So we should start on the kick drum, and the kick drum already is like a chapter for itself. We could make a whole video about this. So the way I approach this is by thinking about how do the kick drums of UMEK sound like. So mostly they have a very long tail, so it's beyond the length of an eighth note, so it's almost stopping behind the hi-hats in between the kicks, right? And then there's always a huge transient. It's very, very strong. It's also a little longer and very, very, very upfront, right? So those are the two main ingredients actually. And there's different layers to start with. And let's start with the sub layer, so to say, the body. So I took a 909 and all I did here is apply a good amount of saturation through the hard curve algorithm and took out a frequency here that I didn't like and that I noticed that a lot of his kick drums are not having. And let's have a listen to only this layer first. What it's doing is obvious, turning this basic 909 into a much more saturated version of it. And works pretty well as the body of the kick. By the way, see the note length determines here how long the kick drum will be in the end. The next layer I worked with is actually the third one here. So I tried to make this very, very strong transient. And I used the 909 click layer, basic Ableton sample, and put a lot of stuff on here. And one thing that should drive your attention the most is actually this echo here, because what it's doing is a Haas effect. For those of you who don't know what the Haas effect is, it's about stereo width. So basically what it does is delaying the right and left channels so something seems stereo to your ear, right? In this particular example, it's on the kick drum transient, which is a little odd because usually we want things like the kick drum to be mono and hit very hard. But actually, I was listening to some tracks of UMEK and I noticed that a lot of kick drums have this just a tiny amount of stereo addition here. So I decided to add this and a lot of pedal. Also some overdrive to emphasize the mids here and apply some general EQing. And we should have a listen before and after the effect so you know what I'm talking about. So that's just a basic transient. All right, now we get some kind of tone and also this weird stereo feeling. It's so crazy to me that he's doing that. It might work because there is another transient, and for this one I've used the kick of the weltsound peak time sample pack, and I remember that the transient of the kick that I made there is very, very much UMEK like, so it's super, super strong in the mids. And when I listen to the kick in the beginning without this transient, I thought it sounds very cool, but it's only a clicky transient. It's not that super strong mid and long transient feeling. So basically what I'm saying is in his track, the kick transient is always the one thing that you remember. Like it's so loud and so strong and so much up front. So I wanted to apply this as well. So I added this kick drum here, put down the sustain and also filtered the bass away. And again, put some pedal on here, emphasizing on the mids and just some simple EQing, and the track sounds like this. And this is much more what the kicks of UMEK sound like. So if we put all of the three together, now you get the idea, right? There's this super strong transient, and next is just some processing on everything. A little bit more of the pedal. I think it worked very well in this particular example. Some more EQing here again, those kind of 200 hertz area. Also needs to make space for the rest of the track because there's so much going on, especially in the bass, that I wanted to have enough space here. And then there's a limiter. Limiting this kick already in the mix gives it this very compressed feeling. And let's have a listen to the kick again now. Yes, that's very strong. So the next thing is actually creating this rumble. And I have two chains here. The first one is really rumble, like low-end information. And it's a simple rumble chain, both delay and reverb, 100% amp, and then some sidechain and auto filter to cut away all the noisy frequencies on top. And it eventually sounds like this. And then when I analyzed cryptic speech, I noticed there is another layer in the kind of rumble area. So I took the same chain, but deleted the delay, changed some algorithm in the amp here, and put the auto filter to bandpass a little higher. And I want to show you the way the LFO works here. So we're going to have a listen to the chain bus texture here in solo. And first I'm going to put the LFO down. Right, notice when I put it up, there's this kind of movement going, and it's 8 notes triangle shape. So I'm not 100% sure if this is the exact rhythm that he was using in cryptic speech, but it sounded very nice to me. And yes, that's the whole rumble chain. And on top of that, I added redux with those settings here. So what it essentially does is it adds some kind of noise texture above everything. And this is something I noticed in cryptic speech and also a lot of other UMEK tracks. And it's a basic technique for techno in general to have this very textured drums. So let's have a listen first without the redux and then with the redux. That's the kick and bass group here, but that's not everything that's happening in the bass. So there's essentially 2 more tracks, and we should have a look at them now. So the first one, I'm gonna take the toms first because they're actually really easy. I just felt that there was this kind of rhythm going, this typical and I didn't need much processing here, just an auto filter to get rid of the kind of clicky transient of the tom. And then this one I'm really not sure about. This one is a serum bass patch, but it's very easy, like not too complicated at all. When I added it last because when I had the whole thing going, I felt like there was some tonal information missing in the bass area, and I felt like it's playing the exact same rhythm as the tom, or like this kind of bass impact here, whatever he's using. And it sounds like this essentially. So it's the track is in G minor, and yes, that's the notes like G2 and G3 with the higher note emphasizing the beat of the tom here. And if we have a listen to the whole bass group together now. That's the idea, right? Next up, to finish on the drums, first of all, the hi-hats here, I was feeling like it doesn't really matter if I find the exact same sample that UMEK found. Basically here, after the first 4 bar of the track, there is like a 16th note hi-hat and an offbeat hi-hat coming in, and I just took a loop from one of the weltsound peak time sample packs, which kind of sounded nice, but it's definitely not the same. So I think we do not have to care about this too much. But what's interesting is this perk roll here, because we're gonna have a listen to everything now. there's this part where it's nothing happening, and you'll actually notice when you have a closer listen that there's a layer in his drums that plays 16th notes, and it's also kind of stereo, and it fills the space. So let's have a listen if I turn this on now. Right, so it's actually not that loud, but if you heard it once in this kind of break here, I feel like if you start from the beginning now, you will hear it everywhere. At least that's what it was like for me. And I took the 909 click layer here again and tried to go there by some kind of processing. Essentially what's happening here is already starting in the sampler, in the simpler, so to say. So I'm having this square-shaped LFO, which is playing 4th notes, and it's moving the pen and the pitch. So we have this kind of panning happening, and also the tone of the click here of the percussion sound changes just a little bit. I think I noticed this in the original track, and when I had it without it, it kind of sounded like a little too steady. So that was the idea here. Also putting the cutoff down just a little bit to reduce the high notes, the high frequencies. And let's have a listen to the track if I turn the effects off and on. Right, so those two basically only do a little, while the vocoder in the end is really doing a lot. I put it on 4 bands here and put the depth informant down, so we have a focus on the mid-range of frequencies, so to say. And this is what this percussion loop sounds like. Alright, next up is the very, very remarkable main lead of the track, and in a way you can say simplicity is key here. Once again, it's only playing the root note, and the sound doesn't really change at all over the track, but it's so aggressive and so rolling that it kind of doesn't have to. Also because there's, as you can see, a lot of other elements that kind of work around that and build the tension, right? But generally speaking, the sound just had to be very massive. So when I rebuilt it, I started, maybe we can just put off the chain and go effect by effect after looking at the patch. So I started like this with a saw wave, like on the oscillator A, and I was trying out some things. I had something in mind already. I was pretty sure he's using unison to get this kind of wide and somehow undefined feeling. But then again, it's also having a strong transient, right? And it's actually hard to get this unison vibe but still have this strong transient, right? Because what I just said before in the video, hope you're paying attention, about the Haas effect is that if something is stereo, it kind of lacks the real punch because the transient is delayed on the 2 channels, like if the transient is stereo. So for that sound, I kind of had to find a way to work around that. And what I did here is put this very, very short 33 milliseconds envelope on the pitch, so it's essentially a pitch envelope, very effective and common sound design tool, which makes a strong transient. And you can see here in the modulation, it's actually like around 40% up, right, on the depth. I've seen stronger pitch envelopes. I didn't want it to be too strong, and it shouldn't be heard, right? Like it should be very subtle, but still push the transient. And I was very sure about the unison, and over the workflow I also added the band plus algorithm, which essentially focuses on the higher information of the saw because of the shaping of the wave. It kind of takes away the low end a little bit, and I felt like this is good because we wanted to have a very, very low sound, like the overtone structure had to come from a very, very low sound, but obviously we don't want this main synth to have frequencies at like 50 hertz or so, right? So the band algorithm is kind of like EQing the signal from in the first place. And yeah, this is where I started the whole thing. Yeah, and it's already kind of close, but yeah, as always, you need to, you know, give some extra taste to the sound. And I started by adding some reverb. I noticed the whole sound is actually kind of having a lot of reverb, but still very direct again. So what that meant for me is having a reverb. I decided to go for this kind of classic room convolution reverb. I'll show you in a second. But what's important here is to have this sidechain compressor. And what it does is it has itself as the input. So this main channel over here, right? But it's taking the pre-FX signal. So what that means is it takes the signal right here before the first effect comes to action. So if I have this on the reverb now, what the sidechain compressor does now is it ducks the reverb down every time a note is played, right? Obviously, because we go pre-FX. So that's a nice way to have your kind of main lead or any kind of sound actually, if you wanted to have a lot of reverb, but if you want the notes to be very clear and very upfront still, sidechaining the sound, sidechaining the reverb with the actual sound can do wonders. So let's have a listen to the reverb solo. The next thing I kind of noticed is I'm missing an octave. So, you know, you start to shape the sound when you try to rebuild something and it starts to sound like the original. And then at a certain point I was like, something's not right here. I always messed around with the filter a lot, tried to find the exact right setting for the envelope and the cutoff here. And I think this one is actually very close now. But there was something else. There were frequencies missing. So the first thought that came to my mind and kind of worked very well for me was to put the same oscillator again, just one octave up. Like here we're on -2 and here it's -1. So what this means is the sound gets just a little bit brighter and also kind of fuller frequency-wise. So if we have a listen now. If you never tried that before, do it. Put the oscillators on different octave, works very well for leads, pads, even bass sometimes. Yes, and that's essentially the sound. What I put on here is a little saturation, and obviously that was there from the beginning, taking away all the low end. I mean, look at that. We don't want this. We don't want this very, very low peak because there is the kick. And we also don't want this other peak because there is the bass. They're both essentially unnecessary, right? And you should definitely get those things away. A lot of times I see people doing this, claiming that their bass is cut. But depending on the sound, especially for this sound, for example, there will still be a lot of bass information. If you only use this slope, then there will still be a lot of bass information. So if you want to cut away a lot of bass, a loud bass part, you better go with the stronger slope, right? The ×4 slope here. If you have other EQ plugins, you can set the slope manually. So that's a good way to kind of work around that. There might be phase issues at some point, but generally speaking, it's even a bigger issue to have all your synthesizers having frequencies in the range that your kick and bass are playing, right? So be careful with that. But that's not it about the main sound. If we have a listen to all this, you will notice that there is something missing. There is some kind of accent happening on the last note, and it's this one here. Actually, it's two things. Like there's also this kind of reversed sound, this kind of that drowns everything back to this point. So let's have a look at the accent first. I kind of doubled the sound here and tried to go from there because I felt like it kind of sounds like out of the same box, you know. And I tried some FM stuff here. First like this, but that was not the way. And then I tried this FM on the saw wave, which is kind of, I mean, not unusual, but very complex. It gives a lot of crazy overtone structures if you put FM on saw waves. And even more if you put like different wave shapes here on the modulator. But still, that's kind of exactly what I wanted to go for here, because I needed the sound to be very noisy. So if you have a very, very crazy overtone structure that's already close to noise, and then on top I added even more noise with the micro quark sample here, and the whole sound sounds like this. And it's only really there to give this kind of little accent. There's no effects on there, but we should cut the bass. I didn't do that. Right, some way like this. And then there's this kind of reverse sound, and this one I did with the analog by Ableton. And I was like, I don't know, it could be anything. Like it could be a reverse reverb recorded. It could be literally anything. And I think it's not too important to have the exact sound here, but more like the feeling it does, right? It kind of throws you back. You have this kind of repetition of the sequence, and then you need this element that kind of softens the sequence just a little bit every here and there, right? So what this is, it's a noise oscillator and also a saw oscillator. And we have the filter here at 3000 and a negative envelope. So it's basically like a, you know, you go from the minimum of the filter up to a certain point, which is this time it's 3.6. And this is actually essentially what this does. There's also a little envelope on the amp, like attack on the amp envelope. It sounds like this. There's again this kind of Haas effect on here to make it very white. I thought this sounded better than the unison here, and just a little bit of overdrive here. And that's essentially the lead sound of cryptic speech. So very, very strong sound. I really have to say, like, UMEK is just absolutely insane. And yes, it was very, very interesting to rebuild that. But that's not the final part of the video. There's one more group that I want to talk about here. And here we come to placement, and it's also very interesting to see what's happening here. So it's different sounds, and as you can see, it's only samples here. I just added a reverb because it was necessary. Because I wanted to have this kind of call and response feeling that he has. So he even has more sounds over the time of the track. There's more being added to that. But I just want to have a listen. So we only take the kick drum and maybe the bass and the tom bass, and have a listen to the call response elements here, including this reverse sound. Try to only use Ableton samples here and change them a little bit. So this one is put 12 semitones up. It sounds like this. And then we have the second one here. It's 12 semitones down. And I only wanted to have this part of the sample here. Actually, it would sound like this. So it's basically some kind of African Perc tom-like sample. But I felt like this kind of decay of the sound actually has the exact same qualities that I wanted here. So that goes to show you how easy you can actually take a sample and do something completely else with it. I mean, if you hear this, you would never think that this comes from this African perk. Yeah, different perk elements here that just make this call and response feeling. There's also a snare hit. I tried to find a snare that sounds kind of similar. It has this kind of pitchy vibe and a lot of noise. And last but not least, there is a clap with a little bit of reverb. And it's interesting to check out how they interact with the main sound as well, right? So let's check this here. Basically, you can say that somehow all the elements have their perfect own place. And I mean, if you listen to Cryptic Speech, you might even say, oh, this track is kind of simple, revolving all around this one sound. But doing this rebuild once again showed me that there is a lot of complexity to UMEK sound. And this is only the beginning. Like, I only did this because when I started doing the rebuild and I was at this point, I was like, okay, this video is already going to be like half an hour if I want to. And it actually had to be this long to explain everything correctly. And if you want, we can maybe do a part 2, because there's also a melody and a nice way he worked in the breakdown of the track. But for this video, we are done now. It's long enough already. So thank you for watching until here. And you can get the whole session, including all the sounds, the patch of the main sound, for free in the description. So check that out, and I hope to see you very, very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.